Welcome back to Atomic News, monitoring global chaos so you don't have to. While the Middle East headlines are still settling, today we are focusing on just one subject: air defense, because one of the most important military stories of this war is no longer just that Ukraine can strike deep. It is that Ukraine is learning how to dismantle the very system that was supposed to stop those strikes in the first place. To understand why that matters, you have to start with doctrine. NATO traditionally built warfighting around air power. Russia, by contrast, built a much more land-centric military machine, heavily dependent on layered ground-based air defense. But there is a catch. Systems designed to fight aircraft, helicopters, and cruise missiles are not automatically optimized for swarms of small, slow, low-flying drones. And this is not just a Russia-Ukraine problem, it is a global, doctrinal problem. Countries are now studying Ukraine because Ukraine has become the most important real-world laboratory for countering cheap mass drones with cheaper, smarter, networked responses. That is exactly why Ukraine's experience matters so much. This week, Zelensky showed British leaders a tablet-based system that tracks air attacks and battlefield activity in real time. And that system is not just about seeing targets. Ukraine is building an entire anti-drone network around detection, warning, communication, and low-cost interception. Systems like Skylock help mobile fire groups detect drones at night with thermal imaging, laser support, and automatic target acquisition. Ukraine is also promoting interceptor drones abroad because the lesson is obvious. Modern air defense is no longer just the launcher, it is the network. And that brings us to Russia. According to Ukraine's defense ministry, between March 1st and March 15th alone, Ukrainian forces struck more than 20 targets supporting Russia's air defense network, including launchers, radars, and major electronic warfare systems. The larger cumulative figure from Ukraine's general staff is even more brutal. As of March 18th, Russia has lost 1,333 air defense assets since the start of the full-scale invasion. That is not a one-off success. That is sustained attrition, and that is the key analytical point. Ukraine is no longer just hitting targets behind the front. It is attacking the kill chain that protects those targets. When Ukraine hits Pantsir, Torbuk, S-300, S-300V, and S-400 launchers, that hurts. But when it also hits Podlyat, Neboyu, Kosta-2E2, Protivnik, Parol, Sopka-2, Valdai, and dome-covered radar positions on I-Patry, that is something bigger. That is not just damage, that is disassembly. And when Ukrainian intelligence showed the destruction of the rare 98L6 Yenisei radar in Crimea, that mattered because open-source reporting links Yenisei to Russia's S-500 architecture, the newest and most advanced strategic air defense system in Russian service. Crimea matters here because it is not just occupied territory. It is Russia's forward air defense island in the Black Sea. From Crimea, Russia tries to protect naval routes, airfields, ports, logistics, and the approaches to Novorossiysk. And Novorossiysk is not just another city. It is one of Russia's key Black Sea export hubs, including major oil-loading infrastructure. So when Ukrainian strikes thin out the Crimean air defense screen, they put pressure not only on military positions, but also on one of Russia's most important military economic corridors. This is also where outside awareness matters. NATO's AWACS fleet has been flying persistent patrols over the eastern flank and the Black Sea region, and NATO says those aircraft can monitor Russian warplanes, detect missiles, and observe movements across the battle space. Add that to Ukraine's broader intelligence cooperation with partners, and the result is simple. Russian radar deployments in Crimea and southern occupied territory are far easier to map, track, and exploit than Moscow would like. Now look at Russia's priorities. Moscow is clearly treated as a protected zone. Reuters reported repeated large Ukrainian drone waves toward the capital in mid-March, with Russian officials claiming about 250 drones were downed over one weekend alone. Separate reporting has shown a dense air defense belt around Putin's Valdai residence. The picture is simple. Moscow gets covered, Putin gets covered, and a huge share of the remaining short-range burden sits closer to the front, where it is then hunted down systematically. A perfect example of Russia's radar and air defense shortage is the strike on the Crimea EL plant in Bryansk on March 10th. 5 missiles reached the target area, and open reporting says the strike was accompanied by real-time UAV reconnaissance from Ukraine's 413th Raid Regiment, and this happened only around 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The plant was producing microelectronics for critical Russian weapons, including systems tied to Panzer, S-300, S-400, and Iskander-class weapons. So this was not just a strike on a factory, it was a strike on one of the electronic workshops feeding Russia's missile and air defense ecosystem. The main reason these strikes on occupied territory work so well is communications. Ukraine began experimenting with Starlink-linked drone control early enough that by February 2023, Reuters was already reporting that SpaceX had moved to curb Ukrainian military use of Starlink for controlling drones, after Elon Musk worried about escalation. That tells you something important. Ukraine was ahead of the curve here. The advantages are obvious. A satellite-linked drone can keep a more resilient control channel, receive updates, transmit video, and remain much harder to suppress with traditional electronic warfare than a simpler radio-linked system. And Ukraine's strike toolkit, built around that logic, is getting broader. The UJ-26 Bober has evolved toward FPV-style terminal control with thermal imaging and a live video feed up to the strike. The FP-1 is reported to carry a 105-kilogram warhead out to around 1,000 kilometers. The FP-2 is built for shorter deep strikes around 200 kilometers from the front, with a warhead being expanded toward 158 kilograms. On top of that, Ukraine has also used AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles, weapons designed specifically to hunt enemy radars. So this is no longer one drone or one trick. It is an ecosystem. Russia understood the value of that model too. In January 2026, Reuters reported that Russian forces had begun using Starlink terminals on drones, including Shahed-type systems, and Ukrainian officials said there had been hundreds of such cases. That created a serious problem, because the same resilient communications that made Ukrainian deep strike drones so effective could also make Russian attack drones harder to jam and better controlled. Kiev then worked with SpaceX to introduce an authorization system, and Reuters later reported that Russian military Starlink use on Ukrainian territory had been deactivated. And even Moscow is now admitting where this is going. Reuters reported this week that Sergei Shoigu warned that Ukraine's drone development means no Russian region can feel safe anymore. That is not a Ukrainian slogan. That is a Russian admission that the geography of the war has changed. So the conclusion is actually very simple. In war, just like in business, success is determined by the quality of the system you build. And right now, Ukraine's long-range strike system looks better built. It is more adaptive, more networked, technologically faster in the most important segments, and in many cases, tens or even hundreds of times cheaper than the Russian air defense assets it is forcing to move, exposing, and then destroying. Ukraine is not becoming dangerous because of one miracle weapon. Ukraine is becoming dangerous because it is building a better system, and in modern war, the side with the better system usually writes the next chapter. This is Professor Nuke, and this was Atomic News. Stay alert.
So stay tuned for all the wondrous views. You're watching Atomic News.